George III. Meeting George III. John Adams, one of America's first leaders, traveled to England and stood before King George III. The year was 1785, and Adams had the difficult task of making peace between the two countries. America had recently won its freedom in a war against Great Britain. Adams spoke with the king, offering America's friendship. He spoke highly of the king and wished him good health and happiness. The king smiled. George III may have lots of American colonies, but he knew he would make Great Britain strong again. Early life. King George III was born on June 4, 1738. His father and mother were the Prince and the Princess of Wales. His grandfather, King George III, was the King of England. Young George grew up in an unhappy family. His father, Frederick, was first in time to be king. Frederick argued with his father, the king. George disliked hearing his father and the grandfather fight. Then, at just between 12 years old, George's father died, making George first in line to the British throne. Someday he would be king. To prepare to be king, George studied harder. Lord Bute, a nobleman, taught George about how British government worked. As King George would have a ministry of group of advisors. Another group called Parliament made laws of the nation. The king and the parliament often disagreed. George would need to know how to solve problems. In 1760, George's grandfather died, and George became king of Great Britain and Ireland at the age of 22. At the time, Britain was fighting France and other countries in a European battle called the 7 Years' War. Soon, the war spread to North America, a huge empire. In North America, the war was called the French and Indian War. Great Britain was already powerful, but when they defeated the French in North America and in Europe, they controlled more land than ever before. The war caused fighting between Lord Bute and William Pitt. One of the king ministers, Pitt wanted and keep fighting, but Bute didn't. The king sided with Lord Bute and gave him the top job in his ministry. From there, Bute brought an end to the war in 1762 and quit his position shortly after that. A royal family of his own. Not long after becoming king, George married German Princess Sophia Charlotte in 1761. Their marriage lasted for more than 50 years, and they had 15 children. Happy at home, the king continued to learn all he could and studied more about history and the government. He learned the names of all the ships in the Royal Navy. He took his job as king seriously, and he faced big problems. Trouble in America. The British colonies in America challenged the king more than any others. A huge problem there was about to begin. Great Britain needed money to pay bills from the 7 Years' War. To get money, England taxed items bought by the colonists. Colonists had to pay taxes on molasses, printed paper, paint, glass, and tea. They became angry and refused to buy British goods. To protest the taxes, they planned the Boston Tea Party. On one night in 1773, a group of colonists climbed aboard a British ship carrying tea in Boston Harbor. The colonists dumped the tea into the water below. The colonists' action angered the king. Soon the tensions boiled over into war for Great Britain to win. King George realized he needed more fighting men. He hired a group of German soldiers to help him fight. 30,000 Germans fought next to British troops against the American colonists. The American Revolution went on for 7 years. The Americans won the war in 1781. The king said the defeat was not his fault. After the American Revolution, the king started acting strangely. He seemed nervous all the time, said odd things, and was confused. He shouted at others and pushed them. Doctors helped the king using the latest treatments. Over time, the king seemed to get better. He returned to his leadership role. More conflicts. King George soon faced more challenges, including another war with the French. By 1799, France had a new leader, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon wanted to take over Europe, including Great Britain. King George did not want to close his country. Great Britain and France fought until 1815, when France lost the war. At the same time, a fight started in Ireland. People there felt that Great Britain passed unfair religious laws. The Irish started a rebellion, but Great Britain defeated them. Later years, King George III was in his 15th year as king. 50th year as king as 1809, and the country celebrated. The joy would not last long. However, in 1810, the king's youngest daughter died, which left George heartbroken. George again became mentally and physically ill. The king was unable to finish his royal duties. Parliament allowed Prince George, his son, to rule Great Britain in 1811. In January 1820, King George III died, and his son became King George IV. New opinions. During his time in power, King George III lost the war with America and slowly became immediately ill. For a long time, many historians thought he was a bad king. Recently, they have changed their opinions of him. George III won 2 major wars, the 7 Years' War and the wars with Napoleon. He served his king for 60 years, and he led his country to greatness through it all. He remained a good husband and father, and he always put his country first.